Welcome to the Cowboy Up Podcast, where talk is all about the West. This episode is brought to you by White Stallion Ranch and produced by Cowboy Spirit USA. Arizona Highways is renowned worldwide, especially for its stunning photos of the Grand Canyon State. Joining the Cowboys at the ranch is the magazine's photography editor, Jeff Kida, who knows Arizona inside and out and also knows the art of shooting photos.
Morning, Alan. How are you?
Well, glad to be here as always. It's always a pleasure to drive up to this beautiful spot, and I just feel comfortable when I walk in here. So
I felt so good. I was walking home last night, and two new guests were walking by. They didn't know me from nobody, and they were just talking about how beautiful it was, and it made me go home happy. But,
it's good to see something through someone else's eyes.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes.
Yeah, and it was genuine. It wasn't for me. It was just they were sharing a moment and probably don't even remember I was walking the other way. Well, obviously you're familiar with the very famous internationally Arizona Highways magazine.
My parents subscribed since can remember, and that's always been a part of the family.
Well, I think it's just, it's just such a cornerstone of Arizona. I mean, our parents just absolutely loved it. And, they just did a really interesting article in the last few months on historic dude ranches in Arizona. And I was tweaked at Jeff, who's sitting here next to me, that we weren't in it. And then my much smarter than me wife pointed out all the ranches in it were closed. They were gone. And she goes, so
you didn't want to be on that.
So she said, Russell, you're lucky you're not on that, in that article. I said, yeah, okay, we'll give Jeff a reprieve. Anyway, well, and Suzanne, who's sitting here with us too, our producer, she remembers when her grandparents were getting issues all the way out in New Hampshire. And, I think Arizona Highways has, I think I read somewhere, has subscribers from about 2/3 of the countries around the world. The other ones probably just don't have functioning postal services or something. I'm sure they would.
I think
otherwise.
Arizona Highways kind of set the mark for a lot of other states and their magazines that they came out with or have come out with.
No doubt about it. Yeah. Well, today we get the insider scoop. It's Jeff Kida. He's been the photography editor at Arizona Highways since 2006. That's a pretty long run. His responsibilities include image selection for the, Arizona Highways is a monthly magazine. The books, special projects. They do 4 annual calendars. During his early career, Jeff worked for small dailies. He was a stringer for the Arizona Wire Services, which we learned is a contractor. Jeff worked for small dailies. I've always heard that word and never knew what it was. Jeff worked for small dailies. I've been over that. He was a photographer for the Phoenix Gazette, freelancer for the AP, Associated Press, New York Times, LA Times, Time Magazine, all the big ones. In recent years, Jeff's documented humanitarian work for the American Volunteer Medical Team and various other NGOs, which has allowed him to experience places like Congo, Rwanda, Vietnam, Sri Lanka, and that's gotten him to some pretty exotic spots. Glad you could come and visit in person, Jeff.
Well, it's good to be here this morning. I always enjoy visiting the ranch. Usually teaching photo workshops, but this time get to visit with you gentlemen.
Are you here just on for a while or full time now?
You mean in Tucson?
Yes.
Tucson. No, I'm based in Phoenix. The magazine is based in Phoenix, so I came down last night, had a lovely dinner, and just look forward to a good conversation with you folks today.
How long ago did you start working for the magazine?
Well, there's kind of a two-step approach to that. I interned at the magazine when I was a wee lad in 1978. Probably should have never happened, but it did. And actually, the magazine is special to me because it changed my career course. I was a political science major, which has not a darn thing to do with photography, but I enjoyed it, and just by happenstance, they let me in the journalism program to take photographs, and through that, I was allowed the internship way back in 1978 when Tom Cooper was the editor, and people were so giving, they were so willing to share both their experiences and their work and their enthusiasm for everything they did, certainly the state, that they sank the hook. That was it for me. I was all in. I decided no matter what, I had to try this. I had to make a go of it.
How lucky you are to find the right job on the very first try. That not a lot of people have that opportunity.
I consider myself extremely lucky. I was sharing that story with a contributing photographer from Sedona, Derek Von Briesen, and we were kind of doing gratitude stories, and this was just a week ago. And he heard my tale, and he said, well, translated, you ran off and joined the circus. And I said, Derek, yes, I did. and I've never looked back.
I love to hear that.
Well, give us a kind of a basic history of the magazine. It was called, do I have this right? It was called Arizona Highways because originally it included maps?
Well, it did include maps. It's actually an engineering magazine. It was actually created to talk about road conditions. And within the earth, so it was April this month, 1925, so we're 98 years old, was the first edition, all black and white, 26 pages. There was one employee, a guy named Vincent Keating. That was it. It was the whole deal. But it talked about road conditions, and it did talk about routes, and the first one in that magazine was Phoenix to Yuma. And they had mileages and road conditions and where to stop and hotels and gas stations and things of that nature. So it really was designed more initially for engineers and adventurous travelers. But hence the name. And we're still part of the Department of Transportation. So we're a government agency. So I'm a bureaucrat.
Well, we'll try and forget that.
Yeah,
I'm going to try and shake that out of my head now. No advertising, right?
We have a couple sponsorship ads. For the longest time, the first 14 years had advertising in the magazine, and then Raymond Carlson came aboard in 1938, and Carlson is significant as an editor. We consider him the architect of the magazine. So not long after he got there, he killed off advertising. He found a way to.
And when was that again?
Carlson came in 38, so probably in 1939, advertising went away. And we brought it back. We brought back two sponsorship ads about 5-6 years ago to help sort of keep the ship afloat. And that's all there is two sponsorship ads a month. So, yeah.
Well, how does that compare? You've brought it along, but how does that compare with your compatriots or other
state magazines?
Other states? Yeah.
Well, I'm biased naturally, but I think I honestly think, all kidding aside, and I've seen a lot of the other state magazines. I think we set the highest standard in the country for this kind of publication. I mean, our contributors, both writers, photographers, and illustrators, artists, are really second to none. And so we set a very, very high standard for what we do and what we are, and continue to do so. But again, as I say, that goes back to this guy, Raymond Carlson, who literally was born in Globe, Miami, but went to Stanford. He was a very bright fellow, but had a vision that was different, and it took it from road conditions to really a tourist magazine. The mandate, literally the state mandate, being to encourage visitors to come to Arizona, to and through the state of Arizona.
And you still operate under that mandate?
We do, absolutely. And different editors have moved beyond the border, allowed the publication editorially to move outside of the borders. The current editor, Robert Steve, likes to keep things buttoned up and keep things within the parameters of the state. And it's a lot like a baseball manager. The players are the same, but the dynamics when you change a manager, those change. But Robert's a good guy. He has a very youthful outlook, and he's got a good vision for the magazine. So he keeps us going.
Well, so did I understand when you said outside the borders, they'd actually let a story leak into Utah or New Mexico? Is that what you mean?
California.
California?
One of the most interesting stories I ever did as a young photographer was Nogales, Sonora, Mexico. We did literally the Twin Cities, and that was February 1981. And I had a blast. I was young. I'm not sure I knew which way was up. I guess I could make okay photographs, but I got to travel into Mexico and do things, but again, and a lot of our produce comes from there and a tourist back and forth and all this sort of thing. But over the years, we have wandered outside of the state borders.
Interesting. So is there or are there similar state magazines that you look at and say, they're doing some stuff?
Oh, yeah. Texas Magazine does a nice job. Vermont Life does a nice job. There's a lot of them. There's a regional magazine association called IRMA that we're part of, and we get to see what we're looking over each other's shoulders, who's doing what. And so there actually is a lot of good stuff out there, but it's in the world of publications, it's hard to keep all of those things going because people have gone to smartphones and tablets and laptops and things like that. So that's clearly a challenge.
Those are your competition is smartphones and laptops and
in the world of traditional publication, it sure is. We do have a digital presence. People can subscribe to the magazine digitally, so that we started offering that years ago. So hopefully that catches on and keeps us going, but we're doing okay.
What's your vision for the future in that?
Well, it's a mix of both, and it all depends on demographics. A lot of our readers today, our current readership, likes hard copy, which is good. But with younger people coming in more and more, they tend to like the digital.
I like the paper in my hands.
There you go.
Well, that's our generation. I just from an outsider, ignorant outsider in this case, what Arizona Highways is a monthly coffee table book, for lack of a better analogy. So I see where a Time magazine or U.S. News and World Report is just digital now. Well, that's a weekly news. And, the photography, you want to see what happened in Beirut, but you don't need a big, pretty copy sitting on your coffee table. Arizona Highways, you go into any antique store in Arizona, there's a whole shelf of them.
Yeah.
I think they're gonna. It's just a totally different type of magazine that's built on photography, which is Jeff's deal. How do you pick the photographs that get in there?
Well, fortunately, I came in almost 17 years ago, and there's a legacy. There's people knocking on the door that want to contribute, and I would say again, going back to this guy Ray Carlson. He started looking at photography and artists right out of the chute. And he hired some amazing people really from the get-go. There's a fellow originally from Bavaria, Josef Munch, who was one of the first guys. He was very nervous. He brought over a stack of 8x10 black and whites. He was nervous to see this guy Carlson. And Carlson looked through all his work and said, can I hang on to these for future publication? And that was the beginning. And Munch just kept going. And his son David, we jokingly refer to as King David because the guy's got over 50 coffee table books in print under his own name. So the guy is off the charts. And it was David's work that I used to, when I was an intern there, people would send in packets of film. These were 4x5-inch transparencies, and everything had a cardboard frame around them. And I would wait for David's work to come in because it exceeded any expectation I could have ever had. And the guy was just unbelievable. He's still with us. He lives up in Montana these days, he and his wife Ruth. But what an icon, and the guy just really moved the bar forward in terms of photography. Ansel Adams photographed for the magazine starting in 1946. When I was an intern, we had a filing cabinet full of his just work prints, and the editor asked me to go through all of these work prints and sort of geographically put them in order. And I got down to the bottom of this 4-drawer cabinet. There was one kind of sticking out. It had a different look to it, and I pulled it out. It was printed at a much higher quality, black and white, and it was signed. And I thought for a second, boy, this would look good in my apartment. And I thought, what's a college kid ever going to do with an original Ansel Adams sitting in his apartment or hanging in his apartment? So I went into the editor and said, boss, we should do something with this other than bury it in the filing cabinet. But it was an original Adams.
Wow. Yeah. How about Ray Manley?
Oh, my gosh. Another icon. He was one of the innovators, I think, who really came on strong in the 1950s. And his approach to photography, he started integrating some almost commercial techniques. You'd see he'd do a lot of Western stuff, a lot of cowboy stuff, and you'd see these brilliant photographs of cowboys around a campfire. But he buried an old flash. Back then they were using flash bulbs, and his son Alan tells a story of, he said he can remember being on his hands and knees burying the cable that went from the camera to the flash that was hidden behind the campfire to illuminate the cowboy standing behind it at twilight. And it was just these great, wonderful things. So Ray was bringing in all sorts of techniques that were different. He had a great eye. He was entrepreneurial, and he worked his fanny off.
Well, you probably don't know this, but Ray Manley started as a Dude Ranch guest photographer.
Oh, my goodness.
And among other, Tucson had a lot of ranches. And we came in 65. By then, he was already famous.
Yep.
And became a friend of our parents. He did his first 16-millimeter, then black and white film of our ranch. And that was the first time he did movies. And then the next movie, my dad and my dad's friend Max Hahn got funded In Search of the Sun, which was a promo color film that traveled the world promoting Tucson. But back to Manley, one of my favorite guests of all time, Al Mead, owned a third of the ranch before us. He was one of the 3 partners that bought MZ Bar and turned it into White Stallion. He says, Ray used to take pictures of us as guests and then sell us the pictures. And he said he got us all to go up to the top of Panther Peak on horseback. He says, and that was scary. And he said he thought it would be an amazing picture. And once you're up there, there's no reference. He said it was a total waste of time.
No background.
Yeah, he said, so we just rode up there for nothing. But that's how he started, and was a good friend along with Mickey Prim and Reese and a couple of those other guys who were my parents' friends. So, but Ray was kind of a big deal in Arizona for a long time.
He was a real big deal. Absolutely. 100%. I consider him one of the people who literally moved the photographic bar. He really did. And he was very innovative, very entrepreneurial, like you say. He was willing to go for it, but yeah, he really was something.
Yeah, and you used to take photo trips. My aunt would go on some of those, and
that's where the end. Yeah, he was doing a lot
doing tourism, really, not just taking them to where he took. So, what do you like to use for cameras today? I mean, just in the short frame of time, we've gone from. I remember watching a Marlboro shoot where these assistants. Fantastic photographer named Hannah Schmidt was doing the shoot, and they had the film in coolers scattered around, and his assistants were running film, loading cameras, and running film back to the cooler, running new film, and of course film is almost gone.
Yeah, we knew hardly anybody uses film anymore. Certainly in our business, it's all digital now, and I probably haven't touched a sheet of film or a roll of film in darn near 20 years, all kidding aside.
Really?
Yeah. I still have fancy film cameras because they don't really hold their value. But the big digital cameras, there aren't too many bad ones anymore. I've been a Nikon user my whole life. Not it's because it's what I started with, and I never had pockets deep enough to flip-flop back and forth between companies. Some other people, some of my college buddies worked for, Sports Illustrated, and Sports Illustrated would underwrite their equipment. So if Nikon got the jump on them, they'd all move to Nikon, and then Canon would come back, and their autofocus was better, their lenses were faster, or this or that. So they'd flip-flop back and forth. I never had that privilege, so I always stayed with Nikon. But I see things from all kinds of. It's the motor that matters at the end of the day. It really is. I mean, Fujifilm has a 100 megapixel camera, which is a monster camera in terms of memory and all of this. And the first work I saw come from that came from a Tucson-based photographer, Jack Dykinga. And I looked at the first high-resolution image, and I thought, holy cow, this is a game changer. It looked painterly. It was just flat, different. But it's a larger than normal 35 millimeter sensor, so you're just getting a ton of information. And they're just beautiful things. But it's like anything else, right tool for the right job.
Well, you, I think, answered my question, but I'll ask it anyway. Can the average person tell the difference between a 25 megapixel and a 90, and for what purpose to get them better and better?
I would say chances are no, and it depends on how they're viewing it and what. I edit on a 27-inch, very fancy monitor that's color calibrated because that's what I do for a living. And I see so much work. So whether I like it or not, whether I admit it or not, I'm comparing and contrasting things all the time. I'm constantly, is this better? Is this, it's like going to the eye doctor constantly. Is this better than this? Is this and this and this? So the average person's your answer, probably not. Probably. And at the end of the day, the question, a person, somebody who just really enjoys photography, what do you want to do with this stuff?
Yeah.
Or what do you need to do with this stuff? Do you need to sell it to an Arizona Highways? Do you need to sell it to an advertising agency or anything? And if you don't, just enjoy it. Go with what you can afford. Enjoy the ride, because that's it. Getting out and doing this stuff is, honest to goodness, that's the most important thing. Just, even if it's your backyard and you're shooting flowers, do that. Have a blast.
And that, we better take a break.
Hello, and thank you for listening to the Cowboy Up Podcast. This is Stan Houston from What It Takes Radio and the leader of the Cowboy Spirit USA. And it's hard to believe these two old cowboys. That's right, and they are a bit old, but they have, lots of great stories to tell because they have lived an exciting life on the range. And that's what we're looking for. People who've lived an extraordinary life. Even if it seems kind of ordinary to you, you've got stories, you've got songs, you've got a little wisdom, insight, and truth to share. And just like them, you take the risk and do it. It may be hard to believe, but these two old cowboys had never done this before. And they stepped up to it. And just listen how good they have become and how wide their program has grown, and it's heard all around the world by thousands of people. And they never thought it was possible, and it's been one of the bright spots in their life and career right now. And you know what I'm simply going to say is maybe you could do that too. We would love to let you know whether a podcast like this could be in your future for your book, your life, your business, just simply as a way to share some of the things in a give-back way to other people who've been kind and good to you and people you want to honor, and perhaps just simply helping to leave a legacy for children and grandchildren. All of that good stuff, we can help you find out more about it. And perhaps in 23, we'll get you on the radio and join Alan and Russell in meeting new friends and sharing stories every week, almost every day. Reach out to me at stan@witradio.net, stan@witradio.net, and say, hey, can you get me on the radio? And we'll get right back to you, and I guarantee you, we'll make a good shot at it, and I think we'll probably do just that. You'll be on the radio.
Jeff, where do you have a favorite place to take photographs that, for background or just ambiance or?
This state is so absolutely amazing. I mean, when I was a wee lad, I grew up in Northern Virginia. My dad had an interesting government job, and I grew up around, Four Seasons, rolling green hills, this, that. And when he moved the family out here, I mean, my buddies back there said, what in the heck is in Arizona? Cactus and sand? And I said, well, I guess. And the more, I just keep discovering these places, and I've gotten to know the state, fortunately, really well. So I kind of like all of it, but in my own work, I was always a cultural shooter. I wasn't one of the big scenic guys. I wasn't a Munch. I wasn't a Daiking. I was never one of those people. I liked culture. One of my first stories was covering the CO Bar Ranch outside of Flagstaff. And Marshall Trimble, the state historian, wrote the piece, and I got an education just riding in a pickup truck going to and from Flagstaff and visiting with Marsh. But all of that to a kid who grew up in suburban Northern Virginia it was like a Hollywood set, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is amazing. But you've got the backdrop of the Four Peaks, you've got the huge grasslands up there. I mean, it's an enormous ranch, and these cowboys dressed like they were straight out of Central Casting. It was the most unbelievable thing. So that was it for me.
You couldn't shoot a bad one, man.
When was that?
I couldn't.
When was that?
That was probably 1981. I think it was June 1981. That's why I say probably. I'm pretty sure of the month, June 81. But I have had so many wonderful experiences in so many different parts of the state that it's all grand. I love the White Mountains. The Monument Valley, Canyon de Chelly, the reservations. Joe Munch is considered almost godlike up there in Monument Valley at Hubble Trading Post. They've got a little museum up there, and a lot of it's dedicated to this guy, Joseph Munch, who loved photographing up there. And I understand why. It is amazing. But we have such great diversity here that I always followed the story.
In a given month, how many photographs do you look at in order to select the ones that you use? Give me some kind of an idea on that.
It can vary month to month, but often it's many thousands, literally, because of what we're trying to do. And we try never to duplicate what we've done in the past. It doesn't mean it always happens, but we don't want to duplicate photos. And photographers now submit constantly, since we're in this digital world. We've got what they call an FTP site, so photographers can just literally upload their work, and then I get a notification, myself and the art department, we get notifications that so-and-so is uploaded, and we'll see what's going on. And a lot of the times the guys and gals will send me a note saying, I was way over on the western edge of Arizona shooting the Kofas, or I was up along the Mogollon Rim and the colors are changing, or whatever there was. They'll let me know.
So they'll let you know that there's something you should pay attention to?
Well, they think so. They're excited about it. And if they're excited, I'm excited. But, I've gotten...
Are they afraid of you?
Yeah, I hope not. It is interesting. It did feel like I got treated differently once I took this job. And I'm like, look, I'm still one of you. I'm still a photographer.
I came from you, but now I'm sitting on the throne.
Yeah, but I don't want people to feel like that. I'd rather just sit down and have a conversation rather than anything else. I'm not dictatorial about things. But I will ask for things. I'll say, well, we started here. If I'm giving an assignment, it's like, well, we started and this was the concept and the principle, and it's okay to change, but I think we're going to need more of this. But I don't, try to be heavy-handed.
So you pick subject matter and then kind of let it flow where it flows?
Sometimes for the portfolios, I would say yes. So if we're doing something like, Russell, you were talking about, the Dude Ranches was all historic stuff. So a lot of what we got what we got because it was a history piece. So if we're doing, say, spring flowers, I start with a baseline. I'll find some images that I think are very original, that are very different, but still speak to it. And then I'll work out from that. It's almost a ripple effect, but I choose one or two baseline photos, and then that's where I begin. A journalistic story is going to be an assignment, and that's sort of a different kettle of fish. Whereas I'm hoping people can assemble photographs to share a narrative where you've got establishing shots, you've got close-up shots. It's like watching a movie. You want back and forth, in and out. You want to tell a tale visually. So, but that's a different kind of work.
Well, this is a dumb question, but your storage, do you store by geography? You know, this is from western Arizona, or do you store by subject matter or subject matter?
It's subject, you bet.
So here's flowers, and here's mountains.
Yeah, spring flowers, summer flowers, Grand Canyon, North Rim, Inner Basin, Monument Valley, Canyon de Chelly. Yeah.
You know, Alan had some black and white photos of spring flowers he could have sent you a few years ago.
By accident.
He was really excited to send Sandra.
My sister was in Washington and called me one day, and she said, "Oh, you're having a good spring out there. Send me some photographs." And I said, "Okay," and went out to where the good flowers were and shot a bunch of pictures in black and white. And I didn't know it was black and white. It was by accident.
So she said, "Thanks a lot, Ansel."
Yeah.
So I want to go back to you know, we all sitting here share I think the appreciation for the diversity and just absolute amazing diversity of Arizona. I mean, it's just amazing. So if somebody came here to you and said, "Jeff, you've been all over this state, you've taken pictures of the iconic Grand Canyon, Monument Valley, you mentioned some of them. What's the place I've never heard of that I really shouldn't leave Arizona without seeing?"
Ooh, good $64,000 question.
Yeah, that would be a hard one to pick out of a big number. Yeah.
Yeah, that is a hard one to pick out of and Aravaipa Canyon down here is very surprising. It really is, because you get an interesting mix of deciduous trees, saguaro cactus, red rock, and water. And it's not all that far from here.
You know, I wouldn't have thought of it, but you're absolutely right. You know, there at the Aravaipa Inn and Orchard, they have Aravaipa, a specific avocado tree, growing next to citrus trees, growing next to their orchard of apples and peaches and pears, and saguaro cactus, and a perennial running river, and classic Arizona backdrops. It is absolutely amazing. And then you walk up into that permitted area, and the walls rise like some of those canyons, and it really is. I wouldn't have thought of it, but boy, if you want to see a whole bunch of different aspects of southern Arizona in one spot.
In one place. It really is something.
You told me, you've done a lot of, changing the subject entirely, you've done several of the photo workshops here, and we've got one coming up. You're kind of handing this one off, but it's coming up soon.
Yep.
But in some of you were, I'm using the term personal photographer to Cindy McCain, wife of John, and she did some really interesting philanthropy type stuff, and you were there.
Cindy ran a group called AVMT, the American Voluntary Medical Team, and I got hooked up with her because it was doing my news work. John in 1992 announced his candidacy for the Senate again, and his office was on Central Avenue, and a bunch of us newsies went down there and lined up and waited for the announcement, and thinking that that's all it was going to be. It was going to be a podium announcement, a couple of gestures, and we were out. Well, the family and staff were standing behind the senator, and both his sons, Jack and Jim, were wearing blue blazers and button-down shirts and their little rep ties. And at some point during John's announcement, the older son, Jack, pulls this big rubber spider out of the breast pocket of his coat, walks up to the podium. His head's not even at podium level. Starts walking this spider up the side of the podium. John's not even aware of it. But everybody, the staff sees this, and they start laughing en masse. And I see Cindy throw her head back, and she just she's just laughing, and I'm like, that's it. I don't know what's going on here, but that's the picture. Boom. Shooting for the Associated Press, it went everywhere.
No kidding.
Yeah, and I got a call in the office 2 days later from a staffer, McCain staffer, asking if they could have have prints, and I said, sure, we can do that for you. She said, can we use it for the campaign? I said, well, no, you can't do that, because there's a hard line between what you guys do and what we do in the press. And I thought I made myself clear, but 20 minutes later, the phone rang again. Jeff, it's for you. And it was Cindy McCain. And oh boy, now what did I do? And I went through the whole story again, and I'm a bit of a smart aleck. So I said, on the other hand, if you hire one of us to shoot that sort of thing, you can do anything you want with it. And she says, oh, you freelance. And that was after a little bit of a Q&A. That's how I got in. And she said, you travel? And I said, well, I kind of grew up traveling. So yes, ma'am, I do. And I got to do crazy road trips doing medical missions to places like, when the Rwandan refugees were coming out of Rwanda into the Congo, which was then called Zaire, same country but different name. I flew over, and she's made us some tough stuff. She really and truly is. She was in the thick of it with us, and I went over to with a couple of nurses. And she was trying to establish a place where her medical teams could both be safe, but at the same time effective. But, I mean, it was like, I think 1.5 million people coming out of there. So it's like, holy cow. It was crazy stuff.
Just overwhelmed with
It was
humanity.
overwhelmed. It really was. I thought I had seen tough times and difficult situations, but nothing like this.
So I think that we here in Arizona probably know if we paid a little attention. Of course, John McCain ran for president, and so most people know who he was and his naval history and his POW. But Cindy McCain is a success of her own, and she took her family business, grew it, expanded it.
Hensley.
Hensley, and was a star in her own right, had her own struggles, and is somebody who I think deserves our respect. One of those spouses that sort of disappears behind the star, who in that case was John. But you'd agree with that, right? You think well of Cindy.
I think the world of Cindy McCain, and I mean, it's not just because she's given me opportunities to see many things in many places, but very quietly, her philanthropy a lot of times isn't in the press because I was shooting for the family or for her. She'd very quietly do things for people that were never addressed, and that, I mean, to me, that's the pinnacle of, a really good person or a really decent human being, and Cindy hits on all cylinders as far as I'm concerned. And I'm not just saying that because, I've known her for so long. It's just, for me, it's the absolute truth. That's what I've seen from her, and she is just something.
How much of your job now is beyond photography and into guiding where it goes and where photography in general ends up?
It's probably, to answer that question, is much like how I deal with photographers in general. It's more of a conversation. I don't get to drive that bus. Now, so technology is driving so many things, and a photographer's vision should be their own. And that's really one of the things I look for, is that independent, unique eye. How do they, we've been covering the state for 98 years now. And so how does somebody uniquely, does somebody have a unique vision for any part of the state? And that's honestly what I look for, is that unique vision. So in terms of driving a bus, that's not, the joke is if I want my vision, I'll hire me. That's not what I want.
You could still go out and shoot photos.
I'm a little rusty. I'm a little, to borrow a rodeo term, I'm a little slow out of the chute these days. I can still, if I prep for it, I can still do it a little bit, but I need warm-up time because the skill set that I use today is different than what I once did.
So I want to circle back to John. We talked about Cindy, and I think you went over to their house outside Sedona. And
yep, they've got a property outside of Sedona.
Tell us about that.
Well, I do family photos for the McCains, and there was couple things happened, but one time I went up there and John the senator was wearing a bright pink T-shirt, and I said, "Well, Senator, do you want to change that shirt before we do the photo shoot?" "Nope, I'm good with this." And he was lathering up the boys with sunscreen because, I had a couple of bouts of skin cancer, so he's lathering the boys up, and he said, "Come on, walk with me. Let's you and I find a place to go photograph." So we're walking along Oak Creek, and he's telling me a story about a great blue heron that he kind of over the last, the previous week had developed a relationship with, and it was a side of him that I hadn't seen. Not that I'd been around him a whole lot. I traveled more with Cindy, but it was his love of nature, and I just really saw him, kind of the Washington side of him drop down a few notches, and him enjoying nature and him enjoying this place, and I think that really was a place of, respite for him, a place where he could recharge his batteries, and it was beautiful. But it was really fun to see. But no, John's his own guy, so he wasn't changing the shirt. And after the shoot, he said, "You're staying for lunch, right? Because I'm cooking." And I said, "All right, we're all in."
That's terrific. Well, we've run out of time. We're gonna hope that the next workshop that Arizona Highways hosts here at White Stallion sees Jeff Kida back at the helm. I know we've got someone else, but at least the next time we'll hope that you're there. And
thank you.
And we appreciate having you.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure to hear what you have to say. It's opened my eyes to a lot of things.
You're very gracious, both of you. Thank you very much.
And Jeff, I mean, we literally have people listening to us from all over the world, and sometimes I hear from them that one of the things I enjoy about the podcast is it brings them back to the ranch. Well, we brought them back to Arizona today, and if they want to do that on a monthly basis, what do? It's just ArizonaHighways.com?
ArizonaHighways.com. They can get a digital subscription. They can get the printed subscription, $24 a year for either of those. You can find all of the old magazines online by way of something called the Memory Project.
Wow.
And you can Google that, and everything is digitized now.
I think you ought to take that away, because I like to walk in a room and see a copy on the table there, and you can't do that digitally.
It's a little harder. That's true, unless Suzanne has her laptop open.
And I'll leave with one last comment. My observation, I could be wrong. I'm a subscriber, and I look every month and cover to cover, and it seems like your editor has really brought it in the state, and he's talking a lot about these little, I'm going to call them craft businesses.
Yes.
People making bread or beer, or the guy in, where is it, Kingman or somewhere, making sake. It's somewhere. It shouldn't be Holbrook.
Yeah.
I always confuse the two corners.
Well,
it's Holbrook. Yeah, making sake.
Yeah.
So if you want to hear about, small business doing interesting things in Arizona, surrounded by great photography, ArizonaHighways.com.
That's a good description. I like that.
There you go.
Families and dude ranches, that's what people think of when they think of dude ranches. And of course, White Stallion Ranch is no different. Outdoor activities, there's all kinds of things to do together. Horseback riding, rock climbing, archery, shooting, hiking, tennis, basketball, horseshoes, swimming pool, hot tub. I don't know if you do spa services together, but we've got those. And of course, the game room with all those games and evening entertainment. Families really get together and enjoy that. But one of the great experiences is giving the kids a bit of independence, and you can't really absorb that until you experience it. And watching your kid run off with a bunch of other kids to go off on a ride without you, or playing games after dinner, or going, "Hey, Mom, Dad, we're heading over to the game room. See you at dinner." It's just not too many places you get to do that. And people my age, we had a bit of history with that, but the world today, it's a bit different. I think most importantly, the families leave with that memory of really truly experiencing a vacation, and a pretty varied vacation, all together, and with all those experiences shared, sometimes together, most of the time together, but not always, and everybody finding something they really enjoy. So whitestallion.com, all the information, the website's pretty extensive, and you can call 888-977-2624, or most easily whitestallion.com. You know, Alan, I'm one of those people, whether it was digital or film. In the old days when it was film, I'd take pictures and I was sure they were going to be spectacular. And of course there was this delay, and then I get them, and I was, without exception, almost always at least, disappointed. And so I discovered I was not a good photographer. And it wasn't even, my wife Laura has such an eye. She's not technically Jeff Kida by any means, but she's got that eye. She composes them and she turns it into art. And photography is an art. There's just absolutely no doubt about that. But I almost, as a person who can't do it, this is my sort of my setup for the fact that I think there's almost something religious about photography when you look at the old stuff, and they've captured that moment. And we can all think of those photographs, those guys sitting on the board while they're building the skyscraper in New York, and they're having lunch, and one false move and they're 40 stories down, and they're just sitting having lunch. And it was a moment, and I think photography has a special role that can't be equaled.
Well said.
And that's a wrap from beautiful Arizona. Hope you enjoyed this episode. A Western shout out to Stan Houston and his production team. Hey, are you a Walt Longmire fan? If so, then you're a Craig Johnson fan. Next week, Craig chats with the Cowboys about his illustrious career as a best-selling author and the creator of the Longmire stories. Be sure to join us. Until then, I'm Lynn Weezy Sneed, reminding you to sit tall and ride safe.